The Grim Reaper lent me 3 days to bid farewell to my family. On the first day, my mother tearfully told me to get lost. On the second day, my father yelled at me to go die. At my coming-of-age ceremony on the third day, they publicly announced that my cousin would inherit the family business. When it was my turn, my father disdainfully tossed me $5,000. This is your severance from the family. Even if you die out there, don't ever claim to be a daughter of the Smith family. I pulled up my collar to cover the hideous, gaping wound on my neck and nodded silently. In my mother's beloved rose garden, a tattered high school girl's uniform was found, soiled with mud and heavily stained with blood. The police arrived and immediately called my cousin Yami for questioning. The forensic analyst determined from the coagulation of the blood that the incident occurred 3 nights ago. The police said, "Where were you at that time, Yami?" Frightened, nestled into my mother's arms and whispered her recollection. "I was at home practicing the piano. I didn't go anywhere." Seeing this, my mother, heartbroken, hastily explained, "That's right, because today is Yami's coming-of-age ceremony and she is supposed to perform a piano piece, so for the past half-month, she has been practicing every day, locked in her room, not going anywhere." Captain Lee of the criminal investigation team looked puzzled. "Is this your daughter Nina?" "She didn't look like this the last time I saw her. This is the younger cousin. The elder miss hasn't come." The caretaker of the rose garden hesitantly spoke up. Captain Lee furrowed his brow. "What's going on? Weren't we supposed to have summoned everyone for questioning?" When questioned, my mother uncomfortably looked away. "That child has been acting strangely lately, silent and uncommunicative, avoiding everyone. I figured it would be useless to ask her anything, so I simply didn't notify her to come." "Nonsense," Captain Lee scolded, but seeing my mother's red eyes, he couldn't help but sigh and said, "Mrs. Smith, I remember the psychologist telling you after your son's incident that Nina was in a bad state, and it wasn't entirely her fault." "Captain Lee," my mother sharply interrupted him, her voice piercing, "this is my family matter. I'm tired. Please feel free to leave." After saying that, she took Yami and turned to leave. Just as Captain Lee was about to say something, the policeman who went to find me hurried back with a grave expression, reporting, "Captain, we couldn't find Nina, but we discovered her school uniform is missing." Simultaneously, my mother also received this news. Her expression froze for a moment, then grew angry. "What blood-stained uniform? All of this must be Nina's doing again. She really is intolerable." Yami gently shook her arm. "Auntie, don't say that. Maybe Nina just wanted you to pay more attention to her." My mother's expression softened, and she patted Yami's hand gratefully. "Thank goodness you're by my side, otherwise I'd be doomed by Nina's misfortune." I had just entered the banquet hall when I heard my mother's words. Watching my parents and Yami closely together, my eyes dimmed. My mother smiled subconsciously, while only Yami excitedly waved at me. "Nina, why did you just arrive? Come over for the photo." I walked over, trying hard to call out to my parents, but all that came out was a harsh, hoarse whisper, extremely unpleasant. At the crowded banquet, my father coldly grunted in response. The next second, my mother's disdainful gaze swept over me. "Why aren't you wearing the dress I had sent over? And that face, lifeless. Are you doing this on purpose to embarrass us?" I was left speechless. I couldn't blame her for being angry, for such an important occasion. I had worn a tightly zipped-up windbreaker simply because Grim Reaper had only extended my life by 3 days, but didn't help erase the crisscrossing scars on my body. He even told me, 12 hours after death, livor mortis sets in. I had been dead for 3 days. My sallow skin and spreading livor mortis could no longer be completely concealed with makeup, but I couldn't explain. All I could manage was a stiff and stumbling, "I'm sorry." It was then that Yami interjected, "Is Nina mad because I took her dress, and that's why she's dressed like this to make Mom angry?" Her tone was full of grievance. Only then did I notice that Yami was wearing the dress Mom had custom-made for me 3 years ago, adorned with expensive diamonds collected from around the world, a present meant for my coming-of-age celebration. A wave of bitterness overwhelmed me. I opened my mouth but found myself at a loss for words. "Let's take the photo first, Dad," witnessing everything, spoke calmly. Mom took a deep breath and then her gaze softened as she looked at Yami. Yami is obedient and sensible, not like some people, who put on a sulky face, not knowing who they're performing for. I paused in my steps, still carefully positioning myself next to Mom. Just before the flash went off, I gently leaned my head against Mom's shoulder, She glanced at me from the corner of her eye but said nothing. I smiled blissfully. Everything seemed to return to my childhood. When she would hold me in her arms and hum lullabies, but the warmth lasted only a moment. As soon as the flash faded, she pulled Yummy away from me as if I were some sort of plague. I opened my mouth. The word "Mom" stuck in my throat. At that moment, the aloof Grim Reaper suddenly spoke up. "So you are Simon's little sister." It had been a long time since I last heard the name Simon. How long had it been? About 2 years ago. On one evening, Yummy had hurt her leg during a PE class and the driver had gone to pick her up early. When he was delayed by traffic coming back for me, in my desperation, I ran through the rain down an unopened road. By the time my brother found me, I was being assaulted by a group of thugs. That day, the air was filled with a bloody mist, some from my brother, some from those attackers. I was terrified into stupidity. My memory fractured until the police arrived and the doctors declared my brother was beyond saving. Mom slapped me hard, her eyes splitting with tears as she screamed, "You are a jinx, I regret ever having you." Dad said nothing, just gave me a look of utter disappointment. From that day, my world completely collapsed. I fell ill, unable to sleep night after night, my mind replaying that evening 2 years ago. If only I hadn't been so headstrong. If only I had waited for the driver a little longer, would everything have been different? "Stop blaming yourself," said Grim Reaper. "There is a time to come and a time to go. All is but karma." As I was trapped in a guilt-ridden state, Grim Reaper tapped my forehead, and clarity surged through me. He continued, explaining, "Simon has seen how you torment yourself. His soul is restless, unwilling to reincarnate." My voice hoarse. I struggled to ask, "Brother, can you see me?" Of course, he had once asked him, "To protect you and dying so young, is it worth it?" he asked. Guess what he said? I shook my head slowly. Grim Reaper chuckled briefly and said, "He mentioned that if possible, in the next life, he would still choose to be your brother. You were the sister he had longed for." My heart, which felt stiff, suddenly skipped a beat. At that moment, amid the melodious piano music, I suddenly burst into tears. The song ended to rapturous applause. Yummy rose gracefully from the piano and curtsied to the audience. I heard my father loudly proclaim, "Thank you all for attending my daughter's coming-of-age ceremony." My fists clenched nervously, but then I heard him announce, "On this special day, I have a joyous announcement to make. My niece Yummy will henceforth be my daughter of the Smith family, and she will be renamed Yummy Smith." As his words settled, the applause mingled with murmurs of doubt. Someone whispered, "I thought Mr. Smith had his own daughter. Why suddenly adopt another child? You don't know, his biological daughter is hardly favored. Just look at what she's wearing at such an important event." The crowd's eyes then turned towards me, and all of this was witnessed by my father, who contained his anger. "There's another matter. From now on, the Smith family business will also be inherited by Yummy." Amidst a stir of shock, he finally looked at me. My mother handed him a stack of bills which he took and, in front of everyone, threw at me as if dispensing charity. It hit me hard on the forehead, but I no longer felt the pain. I just stared blankly as he said coldly, "Here's $5,000 as severance. From now on, even if you die outside, don't ever claim you are a daughter of the Smith family. Let everyone present bear witness today." So that was it. From beginning to end, this ceremony had nothing to do with me. I tried to force a smile but couldn't. At the height of my discomfort, Yummy softly said, "Nina, I will honor your parents for you." I instinctively pulled up my collar to hide the gruesome wound on my neck, silently nodded, then turned and limped towards the exit, with piercing stares at my back and endless darkness ahead. Just as I was about to step out, I turned for one last look. Under the dazzling lights, they mingled happily among the crowd. I silently said to myself, "Goodbye, Mom and Dad." But just as I stepped out of the banquet hall, I saw Captain Lee hurrying over. As we brushed past each other, he paused, then turned back in disbelief, raising his voice, "Nina, you're still alive." I was taken back to the police station, and my mother was also summoned. She sat far from me, as if afraid to be associated with me. Captain Lee observed everything quietly and then said, "The blood on the school uniform has been analyzed." He glanced at me before continuing, "And it matches Nina's DNA perfectly." Hearing this, my mother scoffed, "Captain Lee, it must be this child's prank. You are making a big deal out of nothing." Captain Lee did not respond but turned to me, "Nina, don't be nervous. tell Uncle Lee what happened on the night 3 days ago. I shook my head. The Grim Reaper had said that people forget the cause of their death after dying, especially those who died for special reasons like me, automatically blocking out painful memories. Seeing my lack of cooperation, Captain Lee explained, according to our analysis, the damage on the uniform was caused by a sharp instrument, with the largest wound at the major artery in the neck. Given the blood at the scene, he paused and frowned. It's impossible that you're still alive, Captain Lee, Mother suddenly interrupted. What exactly are you trying to say? However, Captain Lee did not continue on that subject. Instead, he turned to my mother and asked, "How did you discover that Nina was missing on the day Simon had the accident?" As soon as he mentioned my brother, my mother fell silent, but my heart was hanging by a thread. "I've told the story many times before. Why do you keep bringing it up? Please, show some respect for the feelings of the victims," she said. When she spoke again, her emotions had begun to unravel. I reached out to comfort her, but the next second, I heard Captain Lee say, "Because on that school uniform, we found fingerprints and DNA from the fugitive involved in Simon's case. Mrs. Smith, we need your cooperation." In that moment, I was struck as if by lightning. Only then did I learn that among the culprits who killed my brother, there was still one at large. After a brief pause, my mother finally spoke. "It was Simon. He has always been sharp and intelligent." Nina came home 20 minutes later than usual that day, and since our house is quite secluded, he was worried. He followed her phone's GPS to find her, the same response as before, but it caught in my throat. As we left the police station, my mother, without a word, harshly slapped me across the face. With tears welling in her eyes and through gritted teeth, she cursed, "Nina, you're a jinx." The slap was both fierce and sudden. Turning my head sharply, I instinctively closed my eyes. In that moment of darkness, the voice of Grim Reaper echoed distantly, "Nina, 3 days have passed. It's time to leave." I visited my brother's grave in the suburban cemetery to say my final goodbye and to find some dignity for myself. It was a deep night with a light drizzle falling from the sky. Holding the $5,000 given by my father, I knocked on the cemetery office door. "Hello, I'd like to purchase a plot," I said. The old man at the desk peered over his reading glasses and examined me. "Young lady, you're wandering around with a face like that?" he asked. I was startled. "You can see it." The old man smiled mysteriously. "These young people today really like to be mysterious, dressing up like ghosts in the middle of the night to bother an old man like me, who's nearly in the grave himself." Realizing the misunderstanding, I breathed a sigh of relief and pointed towards a tall pine tree halfway up the hill. "I would like to buy that spot. How much is it?" The old man squinted and looked in the direction I was pointing. 98,000, that's so expensive." "That's right. Dying has become too costly these days. Might as well keep living," he advised. "Young lady, go back home. It's not safe out here at this late hour." After saying that, he ignored me and went back inside, but I had no home to return to. My only kin was now resting quietly under that pine tree, enduring the cold loneliness alone. I slowly climbed the steps and walked to the pine tree. My brother's tombstone was wet from the rain, offerings scattered around. I cleaned them up and then sat quietly next to the tombstone for a while. The cemetery was on a hilltop, and looking out, I could see the lights of thousands of homes. I smiled bitterly. "Brother, if it had been me who died back then, would everything be different now?" Apart from the piercing wind, no one answered me. After a long time, I closed my eyes and called out to the Grim Reaper, "I am ready to leave." I don't know how much time passed. A long sigh from the Grim Reaper echoed, "Nina, you still have unresolved attachments. I cannot take your soul." Confused, I listened as he explained, "Your attachment is not to your parents, but to your brother, Simon. Did you?" He paused before asking, "See something just before you died?" My heart skipped a beat. A white light tore through the sky, and immense pain rushed towards me. Memories flooded in clearer than ever before. Just before my brother arrived, in a fierce struggle, someone had slapped me hard several times. Ringing ears accompanied by hallucinations. A disfigured face sneered as it approached. His breath was foul, and I couldn't help but retch, which enraged the man. He kicked me hard and spat, "Dare to disdain me? Let's see if you can handle what's coming. Hurry up, guys, don't kill her." With those harsh words, he stepped back and watched me struggle fiercely. It was also him who, during a scuffle involving my brother and others, picked up a brick and brutally smashed it on the back of my brother's head. Blood had stained my eyes red. The moment the sirens blared, the man with the scar seized his chance to escape. 3 years later, I encountered this man, who should have been brought to justice. In a rose garden, it hurt so much. As the memory resurfaced, I could no longer bear it. Everything went black, and I collapsed heavily to the ground. Hey, young lady, wake up. Why are you sleeping here? I slowly opened my eyes. The previously gloomy sky had cleared up. Under the glaring sunlight, I struggled to my feet, feeling stiffer than ever. I managed a nod to the caretaker and then hailed a cab to the police station. Captain Lee, looking like he had stayed up all night, was just stretching and walking out of his office when we bumped into each other. I was speechless, but I quickly snatched a pen and paper from his hand and started sketching. Soon, a rough image of the scarred face appeared on the paper. Captain Lee looked at it puzzled, then suddenly alert, exclaimed, "Is this the fugitive murderer?" I nodded emphatically. His breathing intensified, his face alight with uncontrollable excitement. "Quick, run a facial recognition scan." While waiting for the results, Captain Lee poured me a cup of hot tea. "Nina, you look terrible. Did you not rest well?" he asked with concern. I shook my head and requested to visit the crime scene. On the way, Captain Lee seemed like he wanted to say something but stopped himself. I pretended not to notice. "The Grim Reaper has told me I don't have much time left. Soon, perhaps even today, I won't be able to suppress the stench of decay on my body." The police car stopped at an abandoned construction site. This was my first time back here after 2 years. The dilapidated building was pitch black inside, like a monster with its mouth wide open, ready to devour anyone who dared approach. I mustered my courage and walked in, but Captain Lee stopped me, his tone laden with worry. "Are you ready?" I nodded. I didn't have the courage to face it while I was alive, but now that I'm dead, I no longer want to run away. Crossing the hall, I entered a long corridor and continued to walk inward. As I turned the left corner, a desolate grassland unexpectedly appeared before me, with a small river in front. Across the river stood the Smith family's villa. Captain Lee expressed his confusion. "We've thoroughly investigated this area after the incident years ago, but found nothing." Suddenly, the police dog barked. "Captain Lee, we've found something." A scissor-like tool lay before everyone. It had rained the day before, washing away most traces, but a speck of blood was still visible on its sharpest part. The evidence was clear. Captain Lee, furrowing his brow and pointing towards the Smith family's villa, made an initial assessment. "So, it's very likely that after committing the crime in the rose garden, the murderer fled through here. Moreover, this murderer could very well be the same person who killed Simon 3 years ago. This is a premeditated murder, on the way to the Smith family's home." Captain Lee pressed again. "What exactly happened in the rose garden a few days ago?" I pointed to a portrait of the fugitive. "Did you see him?" he asked. I nodded. "What happened next?" I shook my head. At that moment, a policeman interjected. "Captain Lee, could Nina be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? How else can we explain why a perfectly fine person suddenly stopped speaking?" "Nonsense," snapped Captain Lee, though his eyes showed a trace of sympathy towards me. Naturally, I couldn't tell him that my inability to speak was due to a severed vocal cord. When we arrived at the Smith family's doorstep, we saw people continuously moving boxes towards the entrance. As soon as I got out of the car, a toy bear rolled to my feet. My pupils constricted. "It was a birthday gift from my brother when I was 12. Captain Lee asked, "What's going on here?" The mover glanced awkwardly at me and explained, "Mrs. Smith asked us to throw away all of Mrs.'s belongings, saying she feared they brought bad luck." The surroundings suddenly fell silent. My head bowed. No one knew what I was thinking. It was Captain Lee who broke the silence first. "Let's go to the rose garden." It had only been a day, but returning to the Smith family felt like a century had passed. Captain Lee stated our purpose. My mother glared at me impatiently. "Nina, are you ever going to stop?" Yami chimed in. "Nina, Mom was just starting to calm down. Why are you stirring things up again?" I averted my gaze and ignored them. Captain Lee suggested revisiting the rose garden, but Yami was the first to object. "Officer, this is all baseless. Besides our Smith family villa, there are the Jones and James families nearby. Surely you aren't here repeatedly just because of Nina's self-directed, blood-stained school uniform act. Cooperating with the investigation is every citizen's duty," Captain Lee retorted coldly, leaving her speechless. Then, Pulling out the tool we had found earlier, he asked, "Does anyone recognize this?" The sharp scissors glinted coldly in the sunlight. Everyone instinctively shook their heads. Just then, the lady cleaning the rose garden hesitated before speaking. "I think I've seen this tool with the gardener. It's called an electric pruning shear." Captain Lee's eyes narrowed sharply. Turning towards her mother, she asked, "Another gardener, Mrs. Smith, what exactly did you hide from us last time?" Her mother's eyes reddened instantly under her stern gaze. Yami stepped in front of her mother, annoyed, and retorted, "Captain Lee, it wasn't intentional on my mom's part. Besides, it was all Nina's prank. You're just taking it too seriously." Captain Lee was at a loss for words. He only found out from the cleaning lady that the gardener had been called in temporarily. The cleaning lady explained, "There was a typhoon recently that damaged the greenhouse where the lady of the house grows her plants. That's why we had to call someone to fix it, and that person was this gardener." At that moment, the person in charge received a phone call. "Captain Lee, we have the results. Big data shows it's a man named Bob, 55 years old, who was incarcerated for arson at the age of 35 and served 15 years. His current address is Sun Village, Building 37. All the information matched the gardener described by the cleaning lady. Captain Lee immediately ordered, "Go and arrest him." I was about to leave with Captain Lee when I heard my mother calling from behind, "Nina." I turned around. She looked at me with a complex expression and asked, "Is there any progress with your brother's case?" I nodded slightly and was about to leave, but my mother caught up with me, visibly agitated and trembling as she clutched my fingers. "That damn bastard, I'm going to kill him." Captain Lee stepped forward to calm her. "Mrs. Smith, the criminal will certainly receive his just desserts." But as he spoke, I could clearly see Yami's face turn pale. Before leaving, I looked at Mrs. Smith and called out with effort, "Mom," but she seemed not to hear. There was no time to think further. We rushed to Sun Village, but we were still a step too late. "The window is open, and this is the second floor. It's not too high. They must have just run away. Let's chase them," commanded Captain Lee. Everyone dashed out, leaving me alone in the cramped single room surrounded by silence. Suddenly, the door creaked. The next second, my mouth and nose were harshly covered by someone from behind. A familiar stench enveloped me from all directions. It was Bob. A wave of hatred surged through me, and I bit his hand fiercely. "You bitch, how dare you bite me?" Bob yelled, releasing his grip. I quickly pulled away to confront him at a distance, but with just one look, he screamed, "Are you a human or a ghost?" When Captain Lee returned with his team, Bob was sitting on the ground, reeking of urine and shivering uncontrollably. I briefly explained the situation on paper, deliberately omitting Bob's last question. Captain Lee looked suspiciously between me and the man on the ground, who looked terrified. Choosing not to ask any questions, he pulled out his handcuffs and declared, "Bob, you are under arrest." As he spoke, Grim Reaper's voice unexpectedly whispered in my ear, "Nina, your obsession is over. It's time to leave." Just then, thunder roared outside, and a downpour began. A long-standing case was finally solved. Captain Lee felt a relief in his heart and called out, "Nina," but after waiting, there was no response. He turned around. The spot where Nina had just stood was empty. As Captain Lee was about to go look for her, a police officer rushed in through the rain, his voice filled with indescribable fear. "Captain Lee, the storm has collapsed a corner of the Smith family's rose garden." Captain Lee's brow furrowed, a sense of uncertainty rising within him. "Is there a new discovery?" The officer hesitated, then nervously said, "Yes, it's Nina's body." A chill ran up Captain Lee's spine. By the time he led his team to the rose garden, the scene had already been secured. Mrs. Smith was kept outside, her expression numb as she stared into the void, her thoughts unknown. As Captain Lee passed her, she finally showed a hint of confusion and instinctively looked behind him. Nothing. She opened her mouth, but the question she asked was different. "Have you caught the murderer who killed Simon?" Captain Lee stopped in his tracks, his expression complex as he sighed deeply. "Nina. She's dead. Right in your rose garden." This revelation shattered Mrs. Smith's vacant expression. She cracked a silent, mouth-wide smile, as if hearing an utterly ridiculous joke. "Captain Lee, are you amusing yourself by conspiring with Nina to deceive me? What did she offer you?" Yami also warned, "Please be aware of the legal consequences of your statements." She and Mrs. Smith were convinced that all this was a trick played by that jinx, Nina. Nina had always been like this since she was young, whimsical and eager to attract adults' attention with strange antics, but the only response they received was Captain Lee's thoughtful gaze and his cold departure. The scene where my body was found has been secured. I floated behind Captain Lee, and through him, I could clearly see the pale figure lying in the mud. Thank you, Grim Reaper, at least my body looks to be in decent condition, I thought to myself, apart from the scars on my body. My complexion was a bit pallid, my body was somewhat swollen, the wound on my neck was rather ghastly. I thought to myself, this isn't too bad, at least it isn't a spectacle. Captain Lee, the forensic expert, approached. How is it? Can we determine the time of death, based on the dryness of the blood and the condition of the wounds? It was roughly 4 days ago. Around the same time the blood-stained school uniform was found, he stated. Upon hearing this, everyone fell silent. Especially the team members who had just visited Sun Village with me. Confusion was evident on their faces. I asked the Grim Reaper, is this really okay? Don't worry, after everything settles down, I'll alter everyone's memory, he assured me. Hearing this, I nodded firmly. At that moment, someone reported, Bob seems to have been triggered by something. He keeps shouting that it wasn't me who wanted to kill you. He talks about the debt having a claimant and a debtor. It looks like he might have lost his mind. The case was interrupted due to Bob's mental state, and it was impossible to obtain compelling testimony. However, the fingerprints on the school uniform and the electric clippers matched his perfectly. Faced with irrefutable evidence, he had no chance of escaping the charges. Meanwhile, Captain Lee was not idle. He had a private meeting with Mrs. Smith to question her. Mrs. Smith, why do you dislike Nina so much? His question caught me off guard. It was the very question I had always wanted to ask. Mrs. Smith seemed momentarily bewildered and defensively replied, I don't dislike Nina, she's my daughter, I love her more than anything, how could I possibly dislike her? As she spoke these words, she froze, and so did I, because my mother had never told me she loved me before I died. Then she suddenly laughed, covered her face, and began to sob quietly until she broke down crying. Through her choked and intermittent descriptions, I learned the truth. She had once loved me, especially in the first few years after I was born. My mother rarely let others take care of me, even if it meant staying up all night. She wanted to be the one to tuck me into bed, but as time passed, she noticed that my father had grown colder toward her. The day she discovered his affairs with other women, she made a huge scene. His excuse was heartless. You were pregnant with Nina, you couldn't expect me to go without a sex life. From then on, my mother blamed the failure of their marriage entirely on me. She harbored resentment and despair, feeling life was not worth living, yet she was unable to win back her husband's love. Seeing my face, which resembled my father's, only fueled her resentment, and she became unwilling to be close to me. Everything changed when Yami appeared, wiping away her tears. My mother continued, by then, Simon was already in high school, doing well and bringing pride to the Smith name. Gradually, he also liked being at home more, and then, when Yami was brought back, she was obedient and sensible, much more so than Nina. I shifted my maternal love from Nina to her. At this point, she choked up. All my hatred was left for Nina. I wronged her, she said in agony, but I was lost in her words. Unable to pull myself away, time passed unnoticed. With swollen, red eyes, my mother looked up and asked, when Nina left, was she in pain? This question saddened me. It must have been painful, especially when the electric clippers pierced her throat. Blood gushed out, filling her mouth. A suffocating and desperate moment. How I wished I could have called out for my mother to save me. But all I could hear was the sound of Yami playing the piano and my mother's gentle nurturing, affections I never received and would never have. Watching the silent Captain Lee, my mother completely broke down. She murmured to herself, she was so cruel, not even leaving me a single thought. Captain Lee coldly reminded her, but wasn't it you who had all her belongings thrown away because you found them unlucky? Suddenly, Mrs. Smith knocked over her paper cup by accident. The scalding tea soaked her trousers, but she seemed not to notice. Captain Lee, looking at the woman who seemed to have aged years in moments, asked a burning question. You just mentioned that Yami was brought back. Had she been lost before? The fact that Yami had gone missing and was later found was no secret. The problem stemmed from the location where she was found, which was the same small fishing village where Bob had committed arson years ago. When Captain Lee obtained the evidence, He immediately summoned Yami. However, she vehemently denied knowing Bob or having any knowledge of the arson. Captain Lee, suspecting her, could not get more information and had to let Yami go. As they passed the room where Bob was detained, he suddenly jumped up, pointed at Yami through the bars, and shouted, "It was her. She made me kill Nina. She wanted to inherit all of the Smith family's assets. She's responsible for everyone's death." Yami, who had been calm until then, panicked. She clutched her chest, feebly trying to defend herself, looking utterly pale. Her mother rushed over, standing in front of her seemingly frail daughter, trying to protect her only child. Even her father exhausted his connections trying to take Yami away. I watched from the sidelines as they defended someone who might have murdered her own daughter, feeling utterly disillusioned. "Do you still cherish such familial bonds?" Grim Reaper suddenly asked. I shook my head. "The bonds of kindness in this life are severed. They are no longer my parents. You should know, some people are not fit to be parents," Grim Reaper added. I nodded silently. At that moment, the forensic expert walked in with a report. "Captain Lee, we found a broken diamond in the crevices of Nina's fingernails. Upon investigation, this diamond is from the necklace Yami wore at her coming-of-age ceremony." Captain Lee acted swiftly, detaining Yami and demanding, "Did you see Nina before she died?" A frightened Yami, who had just come of age, began to speak incoherently. "No, she came to see me. I was passing through the rose garden, saw her picking flowers, and Yami," Captain Lee interrupted her loudly, throwing an investigation report at her. "With the evidence before you, what else do you have to say?" The report was the result of other police officers traveling day and night for 3 days from the small fishing village. It detailed the sequence of events of Bob's arson case. Notably, Yami was only 3 years old when the arson occurred. She had a close friend named Judy. 3 days after the Smith family arrived at the village, the arson happened. The family that adopted Yami was killed, leaving only Yami alive. Her friend Judy also died in that accident. Years of professional instinct led Captain Lee to decide on a paternity test immediately. The results confirmed his suspicion. The paternity probability between Yami and Bob was over 99%, meaning they were biologically father and daughter. The one who died in that arson was not Judy, but the real Yami. On the day the case was closed, Captain Lee informed Mom and Dad, Bob and his daughter coveted the Smith family's wealth. They first killed the real Yami and took her place in the Smith family. Then, out of jealousy for Simon's affection towards Nina, they harbored sinister intentions to ruin Nina, but instead, they accidentally killed Simon. Later, Bob pretended to be a repairman to extort money from the Smith family, which led Nina to discover him, thus triggering this series of tragedies. By the end, even Captain Lee could barely bear it. "Mrs. Smith," he said, "Nina is a good child. Please send her off well. I was buried next to my brother as I had wished. The pine tree by my grave stood tall and green, its branches gently swaying in the wind against my tombstone. Like the way my brother used to stroke my hair when we were children." A soft sigh with the breeze seemed to whisper, "Good child, well done." Side story. On the staircase to heaven, I finally met my brother, but he didn't recognize me. I asked the Grim Reaper why, and he replied, "Obsessions must be let go for reincarnation to occur." Simon traded all his memories of this lifetime for your 3 days of life. "To help you let go of your obsessions," I hurriedly said. "Then I am also willing to trade all my memories for my brother's reincarnation. Please, will you agree?" As soon as I spoke, a flash of white light appeared. The old man I had seen in the cemetery appeared before me. He smiled and asked, "Little girl, do you remember what I once told you?" Instinctively, I recited, "Everyone has their origins and destinations. It's all just karma." "Exactly, your brother's karma is tied to you. Go on and be reborn in peace. And he too will let go of his obsessions and reincarnate naturally." "Really, you're not deceiving me." A white porcelain bowl flew towards me. A distant, ethereal voice said, "I've told you, everyone has their own karma, like your mother, who went mad and was confined in an asylum, and your father, who abandoned her and is now penniless and paralyzed in bed, wishing for death but unable to die. Some people are simply unfit to be parents." I took the porcelain bowl. After one last glance at my brother, I drank the oblivion potion in one gulp. "Brother, in our next life, it will be my turn to protect you." After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.